We started the day with philosophy, went into technology. I think got stuck in technology for a very long time. Then moved into IBP as a process. And throughout, one of the things that did come out very strongly, and I think even Nishant did mention it, that machines are good, but there is also a human element. And when everyone was talking technology, a small doubt in the back of my mind is that should I ask my son to be a demand planner or is it a sunset industry? So, kind of perplexing still, but I think. So, what we're going to do today is now is to bring the man and the machine together and talk about building bionic capabilities for demand planning and forecasting. And to do that, I have with me Natasha Chopra, Head Planning and Order Fulfillment at Kohler and Company. Natasha, if you could. Dr. Rakesh Sinha, founder and CEO, Reflexive Supply Chain Solutions. Manotosh Bhattacharya, Sales and Operation Planning, Philips. Manotosh, Lieutenant Colonel Vijay Nair, Anjan Sen, Vice President Logistics, Ultratech Cement. I think I shall find answer to that question. Should I ask my son to be a demand planner? Now that we are saying that everything is going to be machines, or rather software driven or algorithms. Let's explore this whole coming together of man-machine. It's not something that's pretty new. I think for a long time we have been talking about human-computer interface. Industry 4.0 was also supposed to be something on the lines of a human-computer interface, but I think what we're talking here is now extending it to make humans and machines work together seamlessly without having to either cage the man or the machine. There are a number of aspects that we could pick up from this, and probably if I could start with Natasha. Where do you see what do you see the changes in capabilities that demand planners need to have in an era where algorithms are going to be more popular than humans?
I think they need to be, the demand planners need to be more agile at adopting new ways of working. In addition to this, not only for demand planners, this is more around our organization leadership as well, where, for example, at Kohler, we are not very pro in our IT systems. I was talking to some folks just a few minutes back. But the leadership has acknowledged supply chain as one of the key goals, and supply chain excellence is one of the key bold moves for our organization in this year. And what that means is that not only the demand planners carry the goal of forecast accuracy, our managing director, sales team, marketing heads, sales heads, along with myself, we all carry the goal of forecast accuracy, which tells me that the whole organization's focus has to be there. So I'm seeing a sea of change compared to last year vis-a-vis this year. And it's not only for demand planners, it's for the entire organization.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we need also to realize is that for technology to work, it needs to have a top-down as well as a bottom-up acceptability. Top-down, we talk about driving it top-down, but acceptability has to be bottom-up. Dr. Sinha, what would be your thoughts on this man-machine interface and what kind of new capabilities do you see coming up?
I think the new capabilities, I don't think many new capabilities are required. What is required is an open mind. That's the first thing. And secondly, the willingness to coordinate and collaborate with machines. So there is a very simple concept in management, which has been there for hundreds of years. That's the division of labor that all of us have heard of and practiced. Now, in the entire demand planning process, there are several processes, several steps which happen. maybe 5 to 7 steps in the entire demand planning. Now we have to answer this question, basic question. Each step, is it better done by humans or is it better done by the machines? There are certain steps where machines are better than humans, and there are certain steps where humans are better than machines. So once we identify that and have a smooth handoff process between machines and men, I think demand planning flows very smoothly. With frequent handoff, I'll just give you some examples. Like when it comes to the base level forecasting that we have discussed since morning, that's much better done by machines. Especially if you want to do at a granular level, looking at say 5 lakh different combinations of distributor SKU. Now that forecasting is best done by machines, not by humans. But when it comes to promotions planning or the demand shaping inputs, whether it's a trade promotion, consumer promotion, distribution expansion, price revisions, new product introductions, all these are better planned by humans. What type of promotions do we need? But once we identify that these 5 types of promotions can be done to take the demand up, the impact of these promotions is better calculated by machines. Because the machines can look at similar promotions done in the past, what has been the impact at a very granular level. In each territory, what has been the impact, and the impact could be quite different. For example, if you run a promotion of a pen free with a soap, and if you have seen that the demand has gone up by 20% in the past, normally in many companies we would apply this factor of 1.2 to all the forecasts, which is not right. Because in the past, for similar promotions, maybe some geographies have seen an uptick of even 50%, and some geographies have seen just 2% or 3%. So depending on how well the promotion is received by the consumers, this factor has to be different. It's different at each granularity, and that's calculated best by the machines by looking at all such past promotions. So there are several parts of the demand planning which is better done by machines, and we need to allow machines to do that part and then hand over to the humans to see whether it overall matches our ambitions. If it doesn't, we need to either improve the intensity of certain promotions or add some other promotional input. So that's best done by humans.
Yes. Some parts of it, especially when it comes to complex calculations and huge amounts of data, the human is not as capable of it. But Manoj, I want to bring in another aspect of it here. When we hand over these things over to a machine, we are kind of removing ourselves from that frame. What does it do to our own intuition, our own understanding, and how do we, going forward, maintain our own understanding that well in an environment where most of it is opaque to us? And to be very frank, most of what technology does is beyond the comprehension of normal mortals. Probably there are some statisticians and mathematicians who would live off that.
Yeah, so that is what in fact I also wanted to highlight, that we have been speaking in the morning, since morning, a lot of technology, baseline forecast, generating science and maths to it. Now I wanted to bring a very practical, I would say limitation, if I may have to call. Now, what we are trying for is doing a forecast, and eventually we want that forecast to be accurate, and then we are talking about forecast accuracy, right? And what is forecast accuracy is the difference between prediction and actuals. Now, if something has to be actualized, it has to be adopted, right? And that is where my trust, which is what I have also seen, that what you rightly said, that beyond the point it becomes pretty esoteric to understand what is demand planning, what is forecasting, what are algorithms, right? Now, when it gets into, we create the numbers, and then finally we all talked about SNOP and SNOE and whatnot, and then finally we all talk about consensus number, right? One number, one goal and all. Now, I'm sure that everyone would have experienced it the moment you go and tell this to a sales guy that, looking into the stats, your growth is not going to be 20%, it's going to be only 10%. I'm sure that you will not agree with it, right? And what happens is that the dichotomy between sales target and a forecast, right? So that is where we start living in. And until we remove that dichotomy, I have seen things to fail because that percolates now. If someone has anyway given a projection of 10%, 20% high, supply planning team would have tried to meet it, and then it has got produced, and then we ended up following the aspiration. So I would still say that yes, that barrier companies have to learn and come forward. What you're saying is that the intuition has to give that acceptance that yes, number is maybe correct. I may not have 20% growth, I may have 10% growth also, and hence whatever my AOP was created has to be revision. Okay? So that's how I would like to place it.
Yes, and Colonel, if I could come back to you with the same question. What if your reportee comes to you and says, boss, this is a number which has come from my system?
So I will look at the whole SNOP in a kind of a different shade. I will not say light, a shade. See, the whole process of SNOP has come in because the method of manual planning or supply planning, demand planning did not go the way we expected to go, and the results were unpredictable. We had more people bound than kind of a mathematics bound. Demand planning, supply planning is more of a mathematical exercise. It's an exercise that has been done prior to the actualization of the sales. I will try and draw an analogy I was talking about in the afternoon with Girish also. If you've seen a Western music conductor, he has got 3 sets of people who sit. There's a bass, there's a tenor, there's a soprano. Each of them have got a set of chords which they sit and play. They just look blindly at that chord and play. If somebody makes a mistake, you go and change the chord. You don't go and hit the person. You change the chord, change the notation which he plays, so that next time when he plays it or she plays it, she's playing the right tone. So that is something of an SNOP planning. Now each time there is a variation, the human intervention is only limited to that changing of that notation. Not getting the human to intervene and do something on his own. The moment you start doing something on your own and using your judgment, maybe you're not following the process. Because a lot of our SNOP process are people bound rather than process bound. And I think what the whole bionic element of this is, how much of bio and how much of mechanical element into the whole SNOP planning. That's my view.
Anjan, what would you say about the same situation?
So this is actually a very tricky part because the kind of variables that we are looking at, it's not just possible for human intelligence to fathom all the possible scenarios that can occur due to the interplay between different variables, and that's where machine plays an important part. But the larger aspect is that why do we do demand planning? Demand planning is not an end in itself, right? And so when we look at that aspect, I think the best thing that can happen is how much of collaborative inputs we are able to capture in the demand planning process. So that each step that we have, like Sina was saying and we were discussing, that kind of the inputs becoming richer, the demand planning has considered all different scenarios, and then it gives to the supply planning, the production planning, the right inputs, and that's where it all merges together. So that would be my view. Without the human part, the machine would not be sufficient in itself.
I think we are coming there. You're talking of the supervised AI. Once it gets into an unsupervised AI or self-learning AI, I don't know, probably we will be extinct. Yes?
I just want to add to this that it also depends on the forecasting channel. If you're forecasting for retail, maybe what Brian said would be acceptable maybe 90-95% of the times and just looking at exceptions. But if we were talking about project channel or B2B channel, you will require human intervention. You cannot just base your forecast on machine. That is where your sales and marketing and collaborative input comes into play, along with demand planners. So it can't be completely system, and it cannot be completely human. It has to be a mix of both.
So if you were to recruit someone in demand planning today, what are the skill sets that you would look for when you're looking at it from a bionic perspective then?
how well do they understand the business and the ways of doing business? I think that would be my first thing that I would look at. Do they understand business process as a whole, or are they too confined just on demand planning? Because I would not want a demand planner to be just a demand planner. I would want them to be having an understanding of the business, of industry, how we sell, how the customers buy, which channels do we sell in, how's the product segmentation done. So I think it's more a holistic sort of experience and skill set that I would be looking at.
Yes, very interesting. In fact, Dr. Sinha, if I were to ask you, there are behavioral science, we have behavioral economics, we have behavioral finance. Is it time to also start something like a behavioral supply chain?
In that supply chain, the entire supply chain, let's see what the objective is. For a large number of CPG companies and consumer-focused companies, the ultimate constraint, the system constraint, is the market demand. But if it's internal, like a manufacturing capacity or raw material availability, those things are handled pretty well by well-set companies. So ultimately, the constraint is the market demand. Now, the entire organization's job should be centered around the constraint, system constraint. For example, marketing should look at elevating the constraint, how do we create more demand. Sales should look at exploiting the constraint, how should we sell to the full demand, how do we capture the full demand. And supply chain's function is also, it should subordinate to the actual consumer demand, nothing else. Sales forecast is not a consumer demand.
Yes.
The moment we say that sales target is this much and supply chain should supply to that, we are moving away. And we will go wrong. Supply chain should look at only trigger is what the consumer is buying, nothing else. What our internal forecast is, nothing. If there are certain demand shaping inputs done by the organization in S&OP, and that should be the part of discussion of S&OP. S&OP should focus on the gap between our ambition and what the current level of inputs are suggesting. Decide on certain demand shaping inputs to bridge the gap so that our sales will come up to the ambition. That's what the S&OP discussion should focus on. But at all points in time, where the actual demand is either higher or lower than what we have estimated, supply chain should supply to actual demand. Not to the forecast, not to the sales target, not to the AOP plan, not to the nothing. I think it should be laser focused on the consumer. And that's what true consumer centricity is, consumer focus. And supply chain has a pivotal role to track the consumer demand and supply on a day-to-day basis at the granular geographical level, supply to what the consumer demand is shaping in that territory. Nothing more, nothing less.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Any comments from the audience? Yes, sir.
So, my question is to Rakesh sir only. Like he mentioned that supply chain should focus on the actual consumer demand, but then don't we have then risk of having multiple numbers across the organization? So finance has one set of numbers, supply chain, like you mentioned, focuses on consumer demand, finance will have something else. So isn't this, will it create some risk of having multiple numbers with multiple functions?
In my personal opinion, there is only one number what the consumer is buying. Everything else is fiction. And consumers don't care what the finance number is, do they? They don't even know. They don't care what the sales target is. They don't even know. All they know is what they are buying and what they are going to buy. That's the only reality. Everything else is fiction. And we should subordinate to any fictional number. We should subordinate only to the real numbers, the actual reality at the marketplace. And there is a way to do it. And that's the entire concept of demand-driven supply chain. How do we keep our supply chain flexible and responsive to whatever is happening at the marketplace? That's the only job of supply chain.
Yeah, Sneha, if you.
My question is adding on to his question only, Dr. Rakesh. I understand there's only one demand and one number, but the percent of consumer, my market share is going to change. Currently, I'm reaching to only 30% of the consumers. My marketing plans can be to move to 35%, and hence the number will change. And hence it cannot be one number. It will be totally dependent on the marketing inputs, the trade inputs, and the plans. How do we want to increase our market share? And hence, a bit not aligned with this concept, because my consumer demand is, it cannot be one number. It depends on my business strategy.
See, at any point in time, there is one number. And the frequency of revising this number is as frequent as you want it to be. For example, many of the companies which follow demand-driven supply chain, for them this number changes every day. But again, based on the market reality, if the demand is picking up in a geography, that's the reality. And that becomes a new number. Nothing to do with S&OP number. The actual number is what matters. And the revision of this number is on a daily basis. So we have to be flexible and responsive to this daily change in the demand number or the pattern of this daily change. And accordingly supply to whatever is likely to be tomorrow's number, which could be vastly different from today's and yesterday's number. So AI/ML can help in terms of capturing the trends and making a prediction which is much better than the human prediction. And supply chain's job is to supply to this demand by deciding to keep certain buffers at strategic locations. How much to keep is again a supply chain decision. How frequently to change that buffer, and the best practice is to change it every day. Once you get new set of data for today's demand, tomorrow's buffer should change. And the buffer should take care of the pattern of demand change, which includes the trend, the cyclicity and the seasonality, and the impact of various demand driver inputs, demand shifting inputs, plus certain buffers to take care of the prediction errors that we are making or AI/ML is making. And it's possible now to calculate this prediction error at the most granular level. For example, in a typical FMCG supply chain, we are talking of 10 lakh buffers which are consumer facing or rather the retail facing. Now each of these 10 lakh buffers has a different safety stock, which is based on our ability to predict demand for that SKU at that distributor. What is the prediction error? And this will change tomorrow. If we are able to predict better, then the safety stock will go down. If our prediction is less accurate, then the safety stock will go up. So this dynamism is what is required, and the supply chain needs to be designed to capture this dynamism and adjust its supplies to it.
Now that we have opened it up, let me also bring in probably Debu into the conversation. So you talked about a no plan scenario. Where does that place humans in the whole process? Because this is also bionic. So I need to bring the man in somewhere.
Very interesting question, and I'll probably answer the concept of no planning. Yeah, I would say that perhaps no planning is what a vision is. Okay, and if I have to say that truly we have reached that no planning stage, that's not entirely true. Because when you're talking about, especially in an FMCG industry, you have the hockey stick effect, you can say, in your sales system. Okay, and you really can't, and it's something which is ingrained. So the way we are dealing with it, okay, so we have again within a month, we know what the sales patterns is all about, okay. So I would say that out of the 26 working days that our sales systems operate, close to around 20 days is actually with a no planning approach, okay, which is about produce today what you sold yesterday. But there is those 5 days, okay, maybe those last 5 days towards the month end, okay, where again there is an element of, you can say, what should be, you can say, what is the sales ambition, or what's, you can say, even the competitive. Recently, obviously, we have been looking at a lot of competitive context, okay, and we get a lot of inputs even from the marketing and the sales team. So the last 4 or 5 days does have an element of, it really doesn't truly behave in the no planning approach, but you have a combination of, you can say, the sales of the previous day, which is a significant input, also the human input, which is coming from the front end. So that's how we are, you can say, looking at this.
Thank you. I just thought I would bring that up also. If I could ask the same question which I asked Natasha, if you were today interviewing for a planner, what skill sets would you look for?
Good question, and in fact I wanted to bring this up. I believe in the morning Sunit lightly touched this upon, that many times what we see as a demand planner, nothing more than a data analyst, right? And blunt bit, because I've seen it happening, pretty much a junior role who is kind of preparing the data, consolidating and tabling it for the senior management to take a decision on it. But what Natasha is saying, I have experienced it and fully agree to it. If a demand planner has to do his job, he should know the market, he should know the product, he should know the dynamic of it. Okay, that's point number one. And second thing is that he should be empowered to take a decision. What Sunit also mentioned in the morning. that he stands by the number even by differing, or I would say differing to the salespeople, right? So he is from the sales team, but he's still standing by the numbers, and he's differing to it because he sees that it is not going to make or it is going to make, right? So demand planner is not going to go away. If it has to go away, then we are not talking anything other than what we call as RP, right? Robotic process automation. If that is the end of the day, then we don't need any people, or things will anyway happen by robots. But what is that? Human intelligence will not go. Human intelligence and what we call as sales and the forecast enrichment comes from the intelligence. So yeah, I mean, to short answer to that, what Natasha said, I truly agree to it. Perhaps a well settled and well nuanced person should be there as a demand planner to make us smooth, right?
Just another addition to whatever I said. The person should have good courage to be able to talk with conviction. If the sales number is not aligning with their number, then they should ask relevant questions to sales and marketing team both. How is it that you're going to achieve this 30% growth that you're talking about, where the numbers are showing just 15% growth? So they should know what questions to ask. They should have the courage to ask those questions and be blunt in asking those questions.
In some organizations, those questions are not allowed.
See, one element on Bionic was also, if at all we need to play the humans, what we would have all played the beer game, and what we usually do is that the supply guy is representing the sales and the sales guy is representing supply, right? So that we understand the nuances and the challenges, and nothing works like that. So the moment a person plays the beer game and comes out that what is the challenges that the other party sees it, that's it. And then doesn't matter, we would have taken 10 strokes, one stroke will do the job.
Colonel, I would like to ask a different question now at this point. When we look at this, and when a machine is giving us a number, will it lead to a situation where the person becomes less risk aware, he becomes risk averse and starts going with the machine rather than use his judgment? A lot of times I have seen people try, once it says it's coming from the machine, they're a little reluctant to challenge that number. Because if something goes wrong, they have to answer.
The machine gives a number based on the inputs that is fed into it. Now, what you have as a human is the intelligence to interpret.
Yes.
So it is the talent of the person who is reading those numbers to interpret it, taking the inputs that are there in the environment. Natasha has been speaking. Everybody has been speaking that the machine is an aid, I would say. It gives you a number which it predicts. Now, it may not have all the inputs that should have been there or what the current market environment is dictating. So, if a man is actually following the machine, he's not using the bio side of the mechanic end of it. And I don't think he's a good man to have in your team.
Yes.
You should be able to interpret the number, challenge it, and if the machine is right, it's right. But then if you have not put your inputs into it, I don't think you're doing justice to your job.
Anjan, if I could come back to you with this, with a slightly different take on this. SNOP and IBP are essentially process driven, and there is a huge element of machine in it. There is also as all of us are being discussing, there's a significant element of the man. In an industry like yours, which is slightly different in its demand patterns and in its consumption patterns, how do you see this working out?
Okay, so before I touch on that, on the lighter side, when you are asking what are the qualities you look for in a demand pattern and all, I think in supply chain it's a wish list, but most of us we don't get the qualities we look for. So that's a kind of a rhetorical question to ask. But yes, cement, in Indian cement industry, UltraTech was the first to implement a full-blown S&OP process as well as a technology to it. And as we are going along, we are realizing that now we have moved from a monthly S&OP process to a 10-day period, and now we have broken it down even to 3-day period and trying to do a dynamic planning kind of stuff. But whether it is SNOP or IBP, I think the essence remains the same. Like everyone was saying, that what is the number that is being statistically coming, or it is coming from whatever algorithms you put. How do you interpret that number? Does it make sense? Does it resonate with some of the things that you typically see in the business? Okay, so a COVID sort of disruption happens very less. But even in that scenario, are you really going to be able to fulfill all the demand? Can I prioritize some part of the demand? So all this is part of the demand planning process. Like Dr. Sinha was saying, one number, it's kind of often difficult to estimate that one number. And therefore it's a challenge. But the SNOP part, I would say, is that it's about asking the right questions. Have you asked all the possible questions? Have you tried to estimate all the possible scenarios? And if you have done that, largely people would be aligned to what they need to do. While we may not be able to achieve that number, but we may be aligned to what we need.
I think yes. I think if I could sum up what we were talking about is that yes, there is a convergence of man-machine happening. However, there will not be a suspension of man from the whole process. The man, or let's say the person in the process, the person will have to be there in the whole equation. You can't take a person out of the business. And business is 90% about judgment. And yes, you have algorithms which can help you probably create a better understanding of the situations. But at the end of the day, that risk that the person takes in terms of what do I bet on? I think that's a decision that the human should take for a significant amount of time. Though I'm not, I wouldn't go out on a limb, and probably there will be a time when all of this would be automated. The risk taking would also get automated, and we would be probably spending our lives on the beach.
One thing I've known in supply chain, you cannot do that. You can't be relaxed even at the beach.
Yeah.
In between, beach may be.
In fact, I remember that all the trainings that we do in supply chain, it is very difficult for us to enforce a no phone policy. They have to be on their phones, and what we tell in the classroom is that the only phones that we will allow are for your girlfriends or wife. But unfortunately, they are the only ones who don't call. I think they also know what supply chain is all about. Thank you very much for sharing your insights on interesting